Took me a little while to find the video for this, which is why I'm doing this post-fight review a little bit late. But I wanted to definitely do a review of Jerwin Ancajas successfully defending his IBF World Super Flyweight Championship against Jose Alfredo Rodriguez. Happened last Sunday over in Macau, China. Pretty interesting spot to hold a fight between a fighter from the Philippines and a fighter from Mexico. But you know, it happened. It was a part of a number of international fights, basically a lot of fighters that weren't from China to begin with. I mean, Carlos Takam was even on there, scored a bit of a knockout of the year contender. Um, but Ancajas successfully defended this title, as I mentioned before. Did a pretty solid job. Basically, Jose Alfredo Rodriguez wound up retiring after the 7th round due to an injury, or actually the doctors might have stopped the fight themselves, because basically it looked like he messed up his right shoulder fairly early on in the fight as well. It seemed like probably from the 3rd into the 4th round, he was starting to um, move his shoulder in a way where it looked like he might have injured it. Like, he's like trying to like almost rub it out in the midst of the actual fight going on. But overall, Ancajas pretty much dominated the fight for the most part. I didn't give Rodriguez a round. I thought he made the 3rd and the 6th round in particular fairly close. He managed to do some pretty good body work that seemed to bother Ancajas at least a little bit. In the 6th round especially, there was one particular left hook to the body that seemed to kind of almost momentarily stun Ancajas, leaving him inside a little bit too long, and Rodriguez managed to get off a nice little bit of a combo while Ancajas was still lingering on the inside. But of course, right after that, Ancajas had a pretty much immediate reaction to that, coming back with his own combinations, being able to take the round back basically. Overall, Ancajas did a pretty good job though. Was able to successfully outbox Jose Alfredo Rodriguez from the outside for the most part. Ancajas' nickname is Pretty Boy. Kind of styles himself as a bit more of like an outboxing kind of finesse fighter, a la Floyd Mayweather. But if anything, with his skill set, I would actually compare him a little bit more to like the Marquez brothers. I think he's actually really good on his feet, but he's actually exceptional with regards to counters and being able to ratchet off combinations in the midst of what his opponent is doing. Not quite as sharp as Juan Manuel or Rafael necessarily, but I think he definitely has learned quite a few things from their particular styles. He tends to integrate a lot of that very well, but he's also extremely good on his feet, is pretty much capable of outboxing opponents with his feet alone. But he's actually really good with his hands as well. So the way he integrates everything all together from his defense into his offense is actually pretty interesting to watch, and I think he's just an overall well-schooled fighter. He has a really solid jab, especially for a southpaw. A lot of southpaws tend to throw the jab away by and large, or they'll kind of paw with it, use it as rage fighter and stuff. He sticks it out there pretty nicely. He'll hook off the jab as well. He'll sometimes throw an uppercut with that right hand as well. So he has a pretty solid right hand, which a lot of southpaws don't necessarily have. Good left hand as well. Not necessarily like the devastating left hand that some other southpaws have shown recently. Pacquiao, Stevenson, Rigondeaux, etc. But it's a pretty solid left hand as well. He's pretty much a pretty well schooled, pretty well two-handed puncher by and large. Not necessarily like an outright knockout puncher, but he definitely has some sting on all of his shots. Whether it's the right hand, the left hand, whether it's an uppercut or a hook, has pretty good punch variety overall. Fairly good volume. He did appear to slightly lose the plot, probably from rounds 3 to 5 though. He was engaging a little bit more on the inside against Rodriguez, perhaps seeing if maybe he could do a little bit more damage and trying to get Rodriguez out of there. But overall, I think he tends to be a bit better on the outside, where he's able to really utilize his footwork and his overall better reflexes against the likes of Rodriguez. It really depends on who the opponent is, I think, by and large. Against McJoe Arroyo, he was actually able to outfight McJoe Arroyo on the inside a lot better than he was able to outbox Arroyo on the outside. He was able to do both to a certain degree in that fight where he actually won this title. But I thought that his inside work did better against Arroyo, whereas against Rodriguez, I thought his outside work was more applicable and just did a better overall job for him. So, I mean, it was just this overall solid win for Ancajas. He managed to stop a guy who had only previously been stopped by Kazuto Ioka back at 108 pounds. Ioka had been known to be pretty damn hard puncher at 105 and 108, especially, I can't sing the praises of Ioka, especially at those weight classes enough. Ioka is now a 3-weight champion, of course, WBA flyweight champion currently. And Kaz, in spite of the fact that he doesn't necessarily have the name value as Naoya Inoue, the WBO champ, does, as Roman Gonzalez, the WBC champ, does, and as Khalid Yafai, the WBA champ, does. I do think that Ancajas is at the very least at Yafai's level, albeit probably below Gonzalez and Inoue's level at the moment. Inoue had offered Ancajas a fight for the New Year's card in Japan a little over a month ago, but Ancajas' team turned it down. They probably figured it was a little too early for that. They'd rather have more of like a stay busy for their first defense, which of course this fight I'm reviewing here was. But otherwise, I mean, I think Ancajas is good enough that he'll probably handily defeat most everybody that's on the IBF's current top rankings at the moment. If anything, the only guys I really see beating him out there are the other champions, the guys that I already mentioned, or somebody like Juan Francisco Estrada or maybe a Carlos Cuadras. Of course, Cuadras is going to be on the undercard of Golovkin versus Jacobs fairly soon. He's going to be fighting against David Carmona, the only man to go 12 rounds with Naoya Inoue. Give him a pretty tough 12 rounds as well, so it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Gonzalez, of course, is going to be defending his WBC title against Isakit Sarungvasai on that same card. So obviously the plan there, it looks to be for HBO to match the winners against each other, especially if the winners happen to be Roman Gonzalez or Carlos Cuadras, which they're likely expected to be. Although Gonzalez' opponent, Sarungvasai, cannot be counted out of that fight. He's a very hard puncher, and I think that's going to be a very interesting fight to watch. It might wind up being a show stealer of that overall card and become, potentially a fight of the year candidate. Caesar Kid for Sarungvasai hits very hard, and if Gonzalez is able to conclusively outclass the man, I think that speaks heavy volumes for him insofar as his overall skill set is concerned. But as far as Ancajas is concerned, I mean, I think him versus Khalid Yafai in a unification between the WBA and IBF would be a fantastic fight. It would definitely solidify, if not a number 3 in the division, probably a number 4 in the division, because I'd say that Cuadras is probably the clear number 3 right behind Gonzalez and Inoue in the division as of right now, as of how I'd rank them right now. If not, Cuadras at number 2 even, because considering how tough of a fight he managed to give Gonzalez, and Inoue hasn't necessarily fought at that level necessarily, I wouldn't say, outside of the Narvaez fight a couple of years back. Good win, but he hasn't necessarily gone to that very next level since necessarily, in spite of the fact that he has blown out guys at the level below that. And I would expect him to defeat somebody like a Yafai or Ancajas at the moment anyway. But Ancajas versus Yafai I think would be a fantastic fight, or Ancajas versus Juan Francisco Estrada. Estrada is a guy that has really been clamoring for another big fight, especially recently. He even said that he would love to fight Cuadras himself in order to become the mandatory for Gonzalez. That didn't quite turn out, though. Cuadras is going to be fighting Carmona, as I mentioned already. So Ancajas versus Estrada would be a fantastic fight. Outside of that, like I said before, I think Ancajas pretty much conclusively defeats everybody else in the IBF ratings as I'm currently looking at them. Overall, I think his skill set is really good. Really good inside fighter, really good outboxer as well, as I've mentioned a couple of times already. Most everybody else on the IBF list, I think he'd be able to beat in either of those fashions, whether it be from the outside or on the inside for the most part. Rex Cho, I know, is probably the biggest name amongst the guys ranked in the IBF. He's one of the fighters that Bob Arum has been promoting pretty heavily over in China at 115 pounds, along with Zhou Shiming up there. He has spoken of Zhou Shiming potentially moving up to 115 sometime in the near future. I'm not exactly sure what the designs are with regard to that. I'm not sure if maybe they're aiming specifically for Chocolatito or potentially Naoya Inoue as well. I wouldn't like his chances against Ancajas, but it's entirely possible that they may see Ancajas as a weak link in terms of his overall lack of top-level experience. And, in spite of the fact that he did have a pretty impressive win against Major Arroyo, there was a couple of moments in that fight where he seemed to struggle at least a little bit. But I don't think Zhou really has the size and the strength necessary to fight a guy at 115 like Ancajas, who is actually taller and has a longer reach than him, and is just a physically bigger man. I think Zhou would probably carry a little bit of a love handle up at 115, especially, considering the fact that he doesn't even have the drain to win 112 in the first place. So I wouldn't necessarily like his chances there. So, altogether, Ancajas to me is, very much a top 5 fighter at 115 pounds. Him versus Yafai, I think, is pretty much a 50-50 fight. That's the fight I'd probably most like to see. him fight against in terms of overall competitiveness and action and just the way the styles match up. I think it'd be a good test for both fighters. Would clean up some of the division a little bit. Or him versus Estrada, as I mentioned before. I think Estrada would make for a very interesting tit-for-tat type of counter-punching matchup. Very good power counter-punchers on both sides. Ancajas with some good power, good footwork as well. Estrada with, fairly solid power of his own and excellent footwork as well, as we've come to know from him. But overall, a solid win for Ancajas. Pretty much a stay busy win, but a win where he definitely showed his class in the midst of it. And I'm definitely interested to see what his future portends, whether it be against a top level opponent or just one of the IBF ranked fighters. So with all that said, I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace.